In recent years, loneliness has ceased to be just an isolated feeling. It has become a global issue. Part of this change has to do with the way we live today. Large families with grandparents, parents, children, and grandchildren under the same roof have become rare. Gradually, more and more people have chosen to live alone. Others have done so not so much by choice, but due to circumstances. Postponing marriage, delaying having children. All of this has become part of the new normal. But this trend is not the same everywhere. In some countries, loneliness has become so prevalent that it has almost become a national characteristic. And then the questions arise. What makes a country lonely? How do you measure it? What criteria really count? We'll tell you now. And before we begin, it's worth mentioning that this list was not compiled based on guesswork. To get here, Bello Mundo sought data from reliable sources. Among them is World Atlas, which publishes studies on population habits and trends around the world. We also use surveys from Nomad Capitalist and World Population Review, which provide statistics on population, population density, and social changes. Now that you know that, let's watch the video. Number 10. Vatican City. Our first stop is one of the most peculiar places on the planet. Small enough to fit entirely within a neighborhood in many capital cities, but famous enough to welcome millions of visitors every year. We are talking about the Vatican, a country unlike any other, which holds a very particular kind of solitude. Although surrounded by Rome, one of the busiest cities in the world, the Vatican has very few permanent residents. Those who actually live there are basically leaders of the Catholic Church, members of the Swiss Guard, and a few employees who perform administrative and religious functions. All the rest of the movement comes from outside. They are tourists who arrive in waves, pilgrims who cross oceans to see the Pope, journalists, photographers, and workers who arrive in the morning and leave at the end of the day. This dynamic creates a curious contrast. During the day, the squares are crowded. There are huge lines, voices in dozens of languages, and cameras pointed in every direction. But when the gates close to the public, the scene changes completely. The streets become quiet, almost deserted, and it feels like being in a private space. The Vatican is lonely not because of a lack of visitors, but because, at the end of the day, almost no one calls it home. Number 9. Iceland. After leaving a tiny country surrounded by a wall, we head to a territory that seems to go on forever. Iceland is an island in the North Atlantic that seems to have been designed for isolation. Dramatic landscapes, frozen fjords, volcanoes, ice everywhere, and a silence that sometimes dominates everything. But this nation is not here just because of the size of its territory, nor because of the cold that freezes even your thoughts. What puts this country on our list is a set of very specific factors. The first is its geographical isolation. Located between Greenland and Norway, Iceland is far from major international routes, and the sea that surrounds it is not exactly inviting. For centuries, this meant that the local population lived in relative isolation, developing a very unique lifestyle, more introspective and adapted to a hostile environment. The climate also plays a role. Winters are long and harsh, with days when there is almost no sunlight, and much of the territory is simply uninhabitable, dominated by lava fields, mountains, and glacial areas. Most residents live in a few cities, especially Reykjavik. The rest is pure emptiness. This combination of factors makes Iceland one of the loneliest countries in the world, not because of a lack of beauty or national pride, but because it is a place where loneliness is everywhere, in the climate, the landscape, the routine. Number 8. Greenland. And since we mentioned Greenland earlier, we can't leave it off this list. In fact, if we were to choose a perfect setting for a documentary about isolation, this nation would be at the top of the list. It is the largest island in the world, and yet it seems almost empty. The history of this place is fascinating. Ancient peoples inhabited the island thousands of years ago, arriving from northern Canada. But the most famous chapter begins with the Vikings, who arrived around 980 AD, led by Eric the Red. If that name sounds familiar, it may be because of the Netflix series Vikings, Valhalla. But it's worth remembering that although the series was inspired by him, the on-screen version is romanticized. The real figure, Eric the Red, was an important Norse explorer, mentioned in several sagas. Expelled from Iceland, he went on to explore Greenland, where he founded the first successful European settlement. But he was not the discoverer of the island. The Inuit were already there long before. Eric's distinction was in establishing a colony. Today, Greenland is a territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, with vast areas covered in ice, giant fjords, and more polar bears than people. Almost the entire population lives on the coast, in small communities. The extreme climate, isolation, and hostile geography make it one of the loneliest places on the planet, and also one of the most enigmatic. Number 7. Mongolia. Mongolia is one of those places that seems to have come out of an adventure book, a country of continental dimensions covered by vast steppes, immense deserts, and mountain ranges that stretch as far as the eye can see. But despite all this territorial grandeur, Mongolia has one of the lowest population densities on the planet. There is so much land for so few people that in some places you can travel for hours without seeing another living soul. Much of the population is concentrated in Ulaanbaatar, the capital, while the rest of the country is occupied by nomadic communities who have maintained a lifestyle preserved for centuries. These are families who move around with their tents, called gers, in search of pasture for their herds, following the rhythm of the seasons. This means that social interaction outside the family unit is quite limited in many regions. The climate does not help either. The country is also known for its harsh winters, with temperatures that can reach -40 degrees, especially in areas close to the Gobi Desert. This extreme climate, combined with a huge territory, few people, very low population density, and a dispersed lifestyle, makes Mongolia the portrait of isolation on a national scale. Number 6. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is made up of 4 nations: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and at first glance it doesn't exactly seem like a lonely place. London, for example, is one of the world's largest financial and cultural centers, always crowded with tourists, workers, and residents living at the fast pace of the metropolis. But behind this hustle and bustle lies a reality that puts the United Kingdom on the list of the loneliest countries. A significant portion of the British population lives alone. In large cities, the high cost of housing, combined with the modern lifestyle, has increased the number of people who prefer, or need, to occupy a space just for themselves. For many young people, sharing an apartment is no longer the norm, and living alone has become a choice, even if it means living in smaller and more expensive spaces. Another important factor is changes in family relationships. Marrying later, having fewer children, or deciding not to have children at all are increasingly common decisions. In addition, the population is aging, and many elderly people live alone, either by choice or due to circumstances. This situation has intensified in recent years. Brexit has had economic and social impacts that have directly affected the daily lives of many Britons. In some cities, inflation and instability in the labor market have reinforced the trend towards single-person households, a silent reflection of a new way of life. Number 5. Sweden. In fifth place, we have Sweden, a country that many people associate with quality of life, safety, high-level education, and even a certain Nordic charm. But what many people don't know is that behind this image of impeccable social welfare, there is a curious and even somewhat shocking fact. Almost half of the Swedish population lives alone. Yes, almost half. This makes Sweden one of the loneliest countries on the planet, not because of its geographical isolation, but because of the lifestyle of its inhabitants. This scenario is the result of a combination of social and cultural factors. Sweden has a well-structured housing system, which makes it easier for people to live alone from an early age. Independence is highly valued, and there is even an incentive for everyone to have their own space. Add to this the aging population, with many elderly people living alone, and the result is a country where loneliness is almost a cultural trait. Not that this is seen as a negative thing there, on the contrary. For many Swedes, living alone means having complete autonomy over their own routine, and the freedom to organize their lives as they see fit. But this celebrated individuality also raises questions about the impact of a lack of close social interaction on mental health. So much so that, in recent years, the government and social organizations have created alternatives to encourage interaction, such as collective housing and community spaces where people can meet, cook together, or simply chat. And it is precisely this mixture of extreme independence with a certain social distance that puts Sweden in our ranking. Number 4. Canada. Crossing the North Atlantic, we now arrive in Canada, a country that, at first glance, seems the opposite of loneliness. With its cinematic landscapes, modern cities, and world-class standard of living, many people imagine a place full of social connections, neighbors on porches, and close-knit communities. But the reality in Canada shows a very different side to this story. According to international studies, around 27% of Canadians live alone. That's more than a quarter of the population choosing, either by choice or circumstance, to live in a single-person household. This trend is linked to several factors. The country has a stable economy, excellent safety ratings, and job opportunities that allow many people to have enough financial independence to live alone. In large cities such as Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, the fast pace and cultural diversity contribute to a more individualized lifestyle, where daily interaction is limited to work or occasional encounters. In addition, the traditional family structure has been losing strength, and there is a growing appreciation for personal and professional development. Getting married or having children is no longer a priority for many young adults. And although the real estate market is expensive, there are still options that make it possible to live alone, which, in the end, reinforces this trend. Behind all the Canadian hospitality, there is a country where loneliness has gained ground. Not because of geographical isolation, but because of changes in lifestyle, relationships, and choices in a society increasingly focused on autonomy. Number 3. United States. Entering our top 3, we arrive on U.S. soil. When we think of the United States, the image that immediately comes to mind is that of giant cities, busy streets, chaotic traffic, and people everywhere. But curiously, behind this scene of constant hustle and bustle, there is a fact that places the country in our ranking of the loneliest places in the world. Almost a third of the American population lives alone. That means millions of people scattered across a vast territory, in houses and apartments occupied by only one resident. This loneliness, however, is not the result of geographical isolation, as is the case in some other countries on our list. In the United States, it is closely linked to cultural and economic issues. Over the past few decades, the idea of the traditional nuclear family has lost ground. Many young people are postponing marriage and having children, prioritizing education, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. In large cities such as New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, independence has become almost a trademark of the lifestyle. Another point is that, in many regions, the country offers conditions that allow a person to live alone without having to share expenses with family or friends. In some smaller cities, housing costs are affordable, and salaries allow the dream of my own space to become a reality for a large part of the population. At the same time, this freedom brings a paradox. It has never been easier to live alone. And at the same time, there has never been so much talk about the impacts of loneliness on Americans' mental health. After the pandemic, this debate gained even more momentum. Many who already lived alone felt the weight of prolonged isolation, and the number of pets adopted skyrocketed, precisely as a way to alleviate this feeling. It is a curious portrait of a country that is huge and full of people, but where, often, everyone ends up living in their own world. Number 2. Italy. It may sound strange to include Italy on this list. After all, for a long time, the country was almost synonymous with large families gathered around long tables, with the figure of the Italian mama preparing pasta and everyone talking at the same time, in a warm atmosphere that seemed unshakable. The image of a country united by family ties has always been very present in the collective imagination. But recently, the scenario has changed, and significantly. Today, more and more Italians live alone. A significant portion of the population, especially in large cities, chooses to live without company, whether for independence, economic reasons, or simply because getting married and having children is no longer a priority for many young people. The aging population also plays a role in this picture. With more elderly people living alone and fewer large families to maintain the tradition, Italy has seen an increase in the number of single-person households. The contrast is even more evident when comparing the north and south of the country. Regions such as Lombardy and Piedmont, which are economically more prosperous, attract young professionals seeking opportunities, but who end up leading lonely lives far from their families. In the south, in more rural areas, the tradition of large households still exists, but even there, change is beginning to appear. Thus, today's Italy is a country that still retains the charm of family gatherings, but at the same time faces a growing phenomenon of domestic isolation. It is a silent loneliness, not found in crowded streets or lively cafes, but behind the closed doors of apartments where only one person lives. Number 1. Japan. And finally, we reach the top of the loneliness list. Japan is a curious case on this list. It is among the most populous countries on the planet and home to the world's largest metropolitan area, the Tokyo region. Yet, it is considered one of the loneliest places in existence. And here we are not talking about geographical isolation, but a type of loneliness that manifests itself in the midst of urban life, in busy routines, and even within the home. According to official Japanese government data, almost a third of the population lives alone. And no, this didn't happen overnight. This trend has been developing for decades. The country faces a rapidly aging population and a very low birth rate, which means that there are more and more elderly people living alone and fewer large families. In large cities, the cost of living is high, and maintaining a home for more than one person can be unfeasible for those who are still building their professional lives. But the phenomenon goes beyond statistics. There is a behavior that worries authorities and has become known around the world: hikikomori. These are people, mainly young people, who completely isolate themselves from society. They spend months, sometimes years, without leaving their rooms. Their families leave food at their doors, and they live connected only to the virtual world. The government estimates that about 1.5 million Japanese are in this condition, and the number grows year after year. Ultimately, Japan shows that loneliness does not depend on physical space. You can be surrounded by people and still be completely disconnected. That's why it's at the top of our list. And so we end our journey through the loneliest countries in the world. Did you imagine that these places would be in the ranking? Do you know anyone who lives in one of them or has even lived there and can tell us what the experience is like? Share it with us in the comments. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe to Bello Mundo, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.